So sorry about the delay, folks. That was to do with formats and convergence. I'm sure you understand. So one of the many sessions that we wanted to concentrate on in WOW, which is really the levels of violence that are being experienced by women in a number of contexts. Eve Enster is giving a talk at 6 about the current situation in the Congo. There is a talk later on in the weekend about trafficking. It might disturb us to know that human trafficking, there's more human trafficking now in the history of humanity than ever before. There are more slaves in the world than ever before. And trafficking and its effect on women and the violence around that is huge. But perhaps the most secretive and disturbing of violences is the one that happens purportedly behind closed doors. And in all my life, there has always been this sort of circling sense that, yes, we acknowledge domestic violence happens, but people don't really want to know too much about it. Or if they are going to know something about it, could somebody else do something about it, please? And still a sense that domestic violence is the province of dysfunctional families who are clearly dysfunctional, externally perceived to be so, who have financial and educational problems. That may be true, but it is by no means at all the whole story. And as a result of this misunderstanding and perhaps deliberate misinformation, we're avoiding having to look very closely at ourselves. So as a result of the really powerful initiatives that have been happening in this area and a resurgence of the need for us to discuss it, we asked for this panel to be convened. Julia Farrington is going to chair the panel. Thank you, Julia. Julia's worked for 15 years as a musician. She was a founding member of Community Music. She was program manager at the Union Chapel Project. She comes from a strong arts background, but all the time in that background, she has also worked at how the arts works and integrates with social activism. The arts program that she ran famously for homeless people, she established the Refugee and Arts Initiative, and in 2005 she became head of arts of her Index on Censorship, where she continues to champion artwork, particularly by homeless people and refugees. She set up Index's first youth program, Tripwires, and has an ongoing program of research and training looking at artistic expression in the UK culture. So I'm going to hand over to her to introduce the other speakers, and I hope you have an informative and powerful debate. It's a subject that has to be discussed and brought to attention over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jude. I have to say I feel very privileged to have been asked to chair this event as part of this fantastic festival, and I hope that you're all enjoying this great programme of celebration. The issue of domestic violence takes us into the darkest places of human relationships everywhere in the world, and the devastating 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men in the UK and 1 in 3 women globally are affected by domestic violence. This afternoon's panel of experts will give in-depth analysis about this issue and inspire us to add our efforts to bring about change. They bring us right up to date about its urgency, including taking account of the impact of government cuts to legal aid and frontline services, and will tell us about the life-saving initiatives they work on to eliminate domestic violence. I'd like to introduce first Baroness Scotland. She's the former Shadow Attorney General of England and Wales, following her time in government as Attorney General from 2007 to 2010. From 2003 to 2007, she served as Minister of State for Law Reform and Criminal Justice at the Home Office and Deputy to the Home Secretary. Baroness Scotland founded the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence in 2005 and subsequently became its founding patron. In 2011, she founded the Global Foundation for the Elimination of Domestic Violence. She returned to private practice in January 2012. On my left is Melissa Morbeck. She is the Executive Director of the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence. She is a leading authority on the subject of domestic abuse and partner violence and its impact in the workplace. She knows firsthand the benefits of having a workplace that understands and supports people who endure violence. Melissa has been instrumental in the launch of key programs in the United States and continues to support many initiatives on both sides of the Atlantic, including sitting on the President's Council on Domestic Violence. She taught public health at Harvard for 9 years. And on my right is Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart needs no introduction as one of our most popular and celebrated actors. He is here today in his capacity as patron of refuge and as a leading champion for the elimination of domestic violence. He has written of witnessing violence against his mother as a child and the fear, shame and guilt that he has felt because of it. When the charity Refuge asked him to become a patron, he accepted without hesitation. He writes, "I accepted for my mother. As a child, there was little I could do to help her, but now I can give support and encouragement to women who live in the same sort of fear that she did." Deborah Jamieson, on my right, OBE, is the Chief Executive Officer for the Global Foundation of the Elimination of Domestic Violence. Deborah brings to her role many years of experience developing and managing domestic violence prevention and intervention programs in both the public and private sector. She has a health and legal background, and her interests include reducing social exclusion and health inequalities, as well as health promotion and leadership. We're going to start with a presentation from the Baroness Scotland about the work of the Global Foundation. We will then hear from Melissa about the work of the Corporate Alliance. Then Sir Patrick will speak about his own experiences. And then if we have time, we're going to draw Deborah in to answer questions. I mean, we would love to hear from Deborah, so we will have a few minutes of questions at the end. So I would first like to welcome Baroness Scotland. Thank you very much.
Well, whilst they're doing the technical issues, I just want to say thank you very much to each and every one of you for showing the commitment in coming here this afternoon to talk about what is in fact one of the most important issues in our world today. Domestic violence, as you have already heard, affects 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men in our country. This doesn't seem to work, so shall I just talk to you?
Is this your presentation?
Yeah, it's my, this should be my presentation, which is the global perspective.
Thank you.
So it affects 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. It affects 750,000 children in our country. 89% of the repeat victims of domestic violence are women. And up until 2003, we had 2 or 3 women dying every single week. So it was a real scourge. And domestic abuse and violence occurs across the globe. It affects millions of people across society, irrespective of their economic status. No country or community is untouched. And I wished that you could find a country somewhere in the world where that was not the case. At least 1 in 3 women is beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused by her intimate partner in her lifetime. Women aged between 15 and 44 are more at risk from rape and domestic violence than from cancer, motor accidents, war, malaria, or basically anything else. And this is the data that comes to us from the World Bank, who've investigated it. For many women, pregnancy is a time of real happiness and joy. It's a time of anticipation. But that simply isn't the case for every pregnant woman. Many women experience domestic violence first during their pregnancy, and domestic abuse during pregnancy is a major public health concern with really serious consequences for maternal and infant health. And the evidence that we have suggests that around 30% of violence starts or worsens during pregnancy. And it follows that domestic abuse is a factor in a significant proportion of maternal and prenatal mortality and morbidity. We know that the impact of witnessing domestic abuse and violence on our children and young people can be absolutely devastating. and it can stay with them for the rest of their lives, their whole lives. And therefore, I am extremely grateful to Patrick for being with us and helping us to explore that part of a child's suffering. This will often affect the child's health, their development, their educational and emotional well-being. And domestic violence also increases their risk of harm and homicide. And when we look at the figures of dysfunction in children, you'll see that those who lived in domestic violence homes are often overrepresented in terms of those who go on to abuse alcohol and drugs and other forms of difficulty. And so we know that this harm has to be stopped, and we know that the impact is one with which we must really battle. Just trying to get this to move on. I think it may well have stuck. So as I told you earlier, this is something which we were quite determined to change. And when I became Minister for Criminal Justice, it was clear to me that domestic violence was having an aberrant effect, not just in families, but actually was spilling over and making a huge difference in the criminal justice system. We looked first at the number of women we had in our prisons, and when I spoke to the prison governor, it was clear that 89% of the women in his prison had a history of domestic violence or sexual abuse. When I looked then in the juvenile estate, you had the children of those families. 2/3 of the people in the juvenile estates, young people in the juvenile estates, had a history of domestic violence. And then when you looked forward at those in the male estates, the men, tragically, many of them were the perpetrators, but if you looked at their backgrounds, many of them had been victims when children of domestic violence. And it seemed clear that we really needed to make a material difference in how we address domestic violence. Up until that stage, everyone was committed to making a change, but many of the different groups were working in silos, whether it was governmental or non-governmental organizations. And there was a real risk that we weren't communicating, collaborating, or working together in a way that made a difference. And that changed in about 2003. We set up the Interministerial Group on Domestic Violence, which I chaired. And we had every government of a state looking at the contribution that domestic violence was making to the failures of delivering the changes they wished to seek. And the first thing we did was to look at the economic cost of domestic violence, because we frankly thought if people better understood how much money it was costing them, maybe they'd care a little more about it. And we undertook some research, and Sylvia Walby, Professor Walby, did the research in 2004, and she found that domestic violence was costing us £23 billion a year. That was £3 billion in public sector, 3.1 billion actually. 2.7 billion was corporate, the cost of business, and 17 billion was the pain, injury, loss, and suffering. We needed to change that, and we needed to understand how we could save lives and save money. And together with the non-governmental organisations who had such a lot of expertise in this area, and with those who were committed into government, we did. We introduced a different way of dealing with things. We introduced something called the multi-agency risk assessment, which enabled us to understand better and in a more holistic way the types of risks that were going to be capable of causing grievous bodily harm and death, those sorts of behaviours which were likely to put a victim at medium risk, and those sorts of behaviours which were lower in risk. And together, we were able to put together a plan for high risk. We changed everything. We introduced specialist domestic violence advisors. We introduced specialist domestic violence courts. and we trained police officers and prosecutors to work together with non-governmental organisations to make the changes that we wanted to see. That enabled us, between 2003 to 2010, to reduce the level of domestic violence in our country by 64% and save £7.5 billion a year. And that had real consequences in terms of saving women's lives. Many more women and men and children were helped than ever before. More people felt confident to come forward, believing that if they did come forward, they would be helped. We can never underestimate the difficulty that is faced by victims when they have to take that first step to come forward. Many victims feel somehow that the fact that they are being so graphically abused is their fault, and that they feel guilty that somehow they have helped to contribute to that situation. And so taking that first step and having courage to do so, knowing that there may be someone to help you, makes a huge difference. And during the 7 years, we were able to make sure that every pound we spent saved 6. If I can give you an example of the changes we made in London, in 2003, 49 women died in London. When I left government in 2005, that figure had dropped to 5. Now it costs £1 million for every prosecution from start to finish. And if, as this government appears to be, you are solely interested in money, then continuing to save lives makes sense, because you save a great deal of money. I have been very concerned that since we left government, there doesn't appear to be the same sort of understanding of the importance of giving positive creative help, not only to the NGOs, but also provision of legal aid. Some of you will know we've been fighting very hard in the House of Lords in the last couple of weeks to try and preserve legal aid for domestic violence victims. The government had decided to change the rules, which would mean that you would only be entitled to get legal aid if you had been successful in obtaining an injunction within the last 12 months, or if you had a criminal conviction against the perpetrator in the last 12 months, or if you fell within that high-risk category I spoke about a little while ago, namely, if you were at risk of being killed or suffering from grievous bodily harm. If you did not fall within that category, the government proposals, if implemented, would mean you would not be entitled to any legal aid. And we were deeply shocked by that, because if you look at how many women currently get legal aid, it would mean about 54.4% of the women who currently get legal aid would not get legal aid to assist them in the future. And there was a bit of a rebellion in the House of Lords. And together with members from the cross benches, we won that amendment by 39 votes. But we're not out of the wood yet, because the government can still, when it goes back to the Commons, they can still reject it and do something which they've done on the welfare bill, which is claim financial privilege. Now, if they claim financial privilege, it means that the House of Lords amendments will count to nothing. Yesterday, International Women's Day, our Prime Minister and our Deputy Prime Minister both said in number 10 Downing Street that violence against women is now their top priority for this government. As you can imagine, I was thrilled. And so I hope Many of you will write to our Prime Minister and our Deputy Prime Minister and ask them whether, bearing in mind their newfound trenchant commitment to domestic violence, they will now no longer resist the amendments that we have put forward to allow women and victims of domestic violence to get the legal aid they justly deserve. Because I know that we can trust our Prime Minister and we can trust our Deputy Prime Minister, who leads the Liberal Democratic Party, to do what is right and proper, can't we? With a little help from our friends. Now, because of the changes that was happening, I decided that we really had to not just have change for our country, but we needed to change things for victims all over the world. And actually, to be brutally frank with you, I was very worried that if the government didn't understand what we had done in the 7 years from 2003 to 2010, they might not continue it. And this message of what we have done in the United Kingdom by working together had to be told to the whole world, because if we could do this, then every other country can do it too. I shared what we were doing here in the United Kingdom with my counterparts in Spain in 2006. I told them all the things we'd done which were good. I also told them all the things we'd done which were bad, all the mistakes we'd made, all the screw-ups that I hoped nobody else would repeat, and all the hopes we had for new legislation. Now, they took all our learning, they created their own legislation, which I think is probably even better than ours, and they implemented the same process. I'm told by my colleagues in Spain that they have reduced the rate of domestic homicide by 25% in 4 years. Now, if they can do that, what would happen if we could do exactly the same thing in India, across Africa? In India, 70% of women will suffer from domestic violence at some stage in their lives. It's the same in Africa. It's the same in China. It's the same in so many other countries. We know that if just in Europe we were able to do that which we've done in the United Kingdom, we would increase our GDP in Europe by 16%. So there is a great deal for us to do. And it was because of that belief that I created in the summer last year the Global Foundation for the Elimination of Domestic Violence. I did it notwithstanding the fact that everyone said I was crazy. Now, we know that's true, but I did it because I honestly believed that we could band people together to make a difference, and I had no money whatsoever. We were incorporated on the 18th of August. It's the best birthday present I've ever had. My birthday is on the 19th. We were made a charity in September. We went to the UN General Assembly, and we got affirmation from everyone. Helen Clark supported us. Michelle Bachelet from UN Women supported us. Patricia O'Brien, who is the Under-Secretary General for Legal Affairs, supported us. Valerie Amos supported us. I think we've never had so much support from Under-Secretary Generals in the United Nations before. And in fact, so much so that people were wondering whether we were a new branch of the UN. Well, I think we may be with your help. We've had support from the World Health Organization, from the Council of Europe, from the Commission, the European Commission. Everyone has come together, and all the help that we've received has been pro bono. Millbank Tweed and Freshfields, both Magic Circle firms, have given us their legal support for free. Coots are our bankers. KPMG are helping us with our business case, and together we think we probably have received in kind about £1.5 million since last August. We haven't actually received very much cash, but we've received something which is as valuable. we're now at a stage of reaching out. We've had our first in-country assessment in Turkey, and many, many other countries are coming forward and asking us to share with them the way in which we have achieved this. And a fundamental part of what we've been doing is getting business involved. You've heard that in 2005 I created the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence, and Melissa will tell you more about that in due course. But the reason that I did that was to attack the £2.7 billion which is currently being wasted by British business now on not addressing domestic violence. And with many of those companies who've now joined the Corporate Alliance, we are making a difference. If the government isn't going to continue to do their work, there is a real issue for us as to how we will get victims the help and the support they need. And we hope that through the Corporate Alliance, working with other charities and NGOs, business will be able to make a real contribution. My experience in the last 30 years has demonstrated to me that we can do this if we choose. When I started to work on this in 2003, lots of people told me that I was, and I'll just savour this, I was very sweet. Isn't Patricia sweet? She thinks judges, lawyers, prosecutors, policemen, NGOs are all going to work together. They told me that what we have collectively done together was not possible. I believed that with the grace of God, it was. And because so many people worked so hard across government, across the NGO sector, with individuals, so many people joined our partnership that we were able to make that difference. And so now I believe it's a question of choice. Do we choose to do something about domestic violence, which is such a terrible blight on our countries, on our world, or do we choose to remain silent and do nothing about it? I hope absolutely everyone who has come today will make the choice to do something, and that as a result of coming today, each of us, we will do something to make sure that the victims around the world no longer suffer from the pain, injury, and heartache that domestic violence inflicts on our world. Thank you very much.
Well, that was certainly a rallying cry if ever I've heard one, and a fantastic case for the common sense of seeing how domestic violence is the root of so many other of our social problems. I now have great pleasure in asking Melissa to go to the stand and tell us about the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence.
It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today, and I hope you can hear me as I sort of piddle-paddle my way across. No, you're not leaving.
All right.
What am I doing?
I can press this forward for you.
Fabulous.
Just
get me on my first slide.
On the screen. It's on the screen behind you.
Oh, how exciting. Okay, that's great. Fabulous.
Give it a go. It's just the left
I'll
and
give
right.
it a go.
The other one.
Oh, the other one.
All right.
I want to start at the beginning.
Let's go back.
Let's go back. How exciting.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Welcome to today, and for all of us to be together and to be speaking about domestic violence and to be having a conversation. It's so interesting because when you look at someone who is as inspirational as our Baroness, and we at the Corporate Alliance, and I know at the Eliminate Domestic Violence, the Global Foundation, we feel that the Baroness is our very own patron, that it is a whole hand that comes to work. It is a whole person. It's not just one part of a human being that comes to work. When you look at the work that we do at the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence, it is challenging businesses to take a look at the lives of the people that work in their environments. We are a group of progressive companies that take such a look at the lives of the people who work in their offices, and also to ensure that we have the support, the care, and the provision to ensure that their lives are safe. We continue to see a demand for the increase of services and support to people who endure violence. It can take many different forms, as we are aware, and how it impacts people in the workplace. It can have the ability to devastate people's lives, and what we do at the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence is ensure that employers have tools that make a difference. When we speak about domestic violence, it is often about what you have heard about today, the power and control of one human being over another. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men in this country will be impacted by domestic violence. In the UK, in studies that were done in 2009, the cost to UK business is seen as $1.9 billion. 56% of abused women are late for work at least 5 times a month. 54% of abused women miss at least 3 full days of work a month. To us, what is so horrific is that 75% of people who endure violence are targeted at work. In 2010, 1/3 of all the domestic violence homicides that happened in this country happened on workplace grounds. When we talk about how does domestic violence manifest itself in the workplace, it comes through in some of the figures that we have seen, but also in absenteeism. People miss work. People miss work because alarm clocks may have been turned off, because car keys may have been hidden, because clothes may have been destroyed, because there has been bargaining about whether or not there will be someone there to pick up the children at the end of the day. You often see that there is an impact to work in stress in the workplace. How can one be effective managing a very powerful career when one is receiving 10, 15, 20 phone calls every day? What was it like for my secretary having to field over 35 phone calls a day, and the stress that that created, not only for me, but for her? We also see this manifesting itself in turnover, the loss of talented workforces, because people have to flee, because people have to be safe. And, as I have said, the impact to work colleagues themselves. What must it be like for the people who were with me when I endured this, when I was going and running to the bathroom and was crying and so upset because I was being harassed again at work by my husband? It had a dramatic impact on them. And it's interesting because if you look at how employers have responded in the past, you know, we were all very brave, and we've tackled things such as how we support each other for people who have endured and are enduring HIV or AIDS. If I were a woman 30 years ago, would I have self-disclosed about cancer in the workplace? No, I wouldn't, because it would probably have led to my losing my job. You can see psychological impacts as well in the workplace. So you may have someone who's terribly outgoing or is very vocal, suddenly changing their behavior. You may see that a person's appearance will change there will be heavier makeup put on. They will either, again, come in late, leave early. They may be like I was and become very hypervigilant and arrive at 7 in the morning and leave at 12 o'clock at night. I certainly got to know the cleaning crew very well, and actually they were in many ways my lifeline to a safe life. So what is it that businesses can do? There are many proactive things that can be done that are simple, that are measures that save lives. Because businesses are already paying the price in lost wages due to absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover, they're paying the tax. So they are now starting to see that by putting the money into programs, such as having policies in place, when you see in workplaces that there are policies on disability, on anti-bullying and harassment, there can be policies about dignity at work as well. Domestic violence should always be treated in confidence, in the same importance as other safety matters. It is critical to make sure that all members of staff are aware of the true impacts of domestic violence. Why is this important? Because oftentimes perpetrators will come to work. They may bring flowers. They may be, as my husband did, picking me up from work. Knowing that there are people who are trained who can help prevent an incident is critical. It's interesting as well when you start to look at what employers can do. They have a duty of care. So you not only have the duty of safety in the workplace, but you also have the duty of mental health within the workplace. And it is an employer's responsibility to ensure that employees have that to the best of their ability. What we try to do at the Corporate Alliance Against Domestic Violence is empower employers to take a lead and to create change and empowerment for their employees. So it is about being able to provide them with safer lives. This comes through a variety of different proactive, simple measures that they can take. The most important thing that we do is make sure that we signpost to the third sector, to the most amazing organizations that change lives, that save lives. My life was saved because of a shelter that I went to. So places like Refuge, Women's Aid, Broken Rainbow Alliance, these all matter. We signpost to those services, and we make sure that employers are aware that those services are out there and must be supported. We focus on prevention and early intervention, and we empower employers to talk to their staff that this is an issue. We encourage them to demystify, because a lot of times when we hear feedback from employers, they think this can't be happening in my workplace. We were actually at a Magic Circle company, and the partner, managing director, said, "This isn't happening in our workplace." And the senior partner who was in the room, the only woman, said, "Well, where were you 3 years ago when I had to take 6 weeks off?" She had broken up from her partner, who started calling and was emotionally blackmailing her and abusing her and threatening to kill her and himself. And so she needed the support of the employer as to help her get through this cycle. If we take a look, because sometimes people think they're not quite sure how many people this may impact, if we look at a large multinational bank in the UK, it employs 57,000 employees. Ultimately, the statistics that Baroness Scotland spoke of the 1 in 4 and 1 in 6, you'll have almost 9,000 female employees that will be affected by domestic violence in their adult lifetime, and almost 4,000 male employees that will be impacted by domestic violence. And what's critical is it will be the people who endure violence. It is also the people who witness. Because you have people who are working, who are young, who may be witnessing this in their homes, or you may have someone who is working who witnessed this as a child, and the impacts that can happen in the workplace as well. So what is it that we do? We go in, we speak with companies, we talk about best practice templates and implementation guidelines, we talk about communication toolkits, we talk about accredited training, legal toolkits, we have a pop-and-play intranet, health and safety training, safety toolkits that we are working with the City of London Police to develop, anti-stalking toolkits that we're working with Laura Richards and the Susie Lambton Trust to develop, and strategic support to help implement best practice tools and support platforms. We measure impact, and we also have research tools as well, and it makes a difference. As one employer takes a step forward and has the courage to address this, we find that other employers have the courage as well. Some of our partnerships are up on the board. It was interesting that Baroness, I'm going to digress a little, mentioned UN Women, and both Deborah and I were called in December and asked if we would work with Women's Aid and help them to develop a policy and guideline on how to address domestic violence in the workplace. This is a leading organization that works throughout the world, and they had never addressed this. And it was fantastic to be part of the genesis as we not only talked about how you create a policy, but then how do you build sustainability so that it continues to be part of the lifeblood of your organization. If your employer knows that they care about you no matter what, we often see that employees stay with that company for a very long time, and they continue to support it as well. Since 2011, we have seen several companies come forward. 6 members of the Alliance actually have come forward and talked about people within their companies who are enduring violence and how can we help. The most important thing is that we immediately get them into the circle of services that this country has that are second to none, that save lives. It is not the job of the HR managers or the security personnel to do the safety planning, but to work with the experts in the field. Because of our work, 3 weeks ago, we had a senior partner at a Magic Circle firm pick up the phone and say, I feel like a lemon because I never thought this would be about me. All he ever did was criticize me, and suddenly I realize that this is about me and I don't know what to do. And within 2 days, her safety planning was done. She was working with Refuge and with Women's Aid. She was moving her life forward. She is safe. Her children are safe, in large part because of those services and also the City of London Public Protection Unit. We have reduced harm to employees, and we have trained well over 5,000 employees within this country. It's interesting because we see that there is a continued need to address the impact of domestic violence. We are currently in a very difficult economic climate. It is impacting all of our lives. When the Rover plant closed, they did an impact study throughout for, I believe it was over a year, and they found that over 70% of the families had family breakdown, and over 20% of those families had incidences of domestic violence. As the pressure increases, we find that people will endure violence and perpetrate violence. We at the Corporate Alliance believe that you have to address those issues, as well as not only work with people who endure violence, but also with people who perpetuate it as well. So that's my little cheeky slide about what I think is happening with the government right now. And in many ways, I'm not being funny, because it is the Grinch who stole Christmas. Because we are seeing dramatic cuts that are happening, over 40%. They have the capability of ruining lives, of devastation, and people will lose lives because of these cuts. What is interesting and impactful to us is we are starting to see that businesses are coming forward, such as we had this morning at International Women's Day, and ensuring that donations are starting to come forward to help these services, but more needs to be done. It was interesting because walking around the hall, I don't know if you have, to the stalls, there's a play being put on where Goldman Sachs and another company are actually matching and tripling the money that is being received from ticket sales that's going directly back to 2 shelter services within the City of London. That's the kind of difference that businesses begin to make once they understand what the issues are that are impacting their employees as well. It's interesting when you think about how this does change people's lives. Deborah can probably be much more eloquent than I, but she had an employee who came to her and said, "I have a friend," and that's usually code for, "It's happening to me." And she was very high risk. She was pregnant. She had been changing her hours of work. And it was an issue of domestic violence, and by simple steps of helping to signpost to the correct services for getting safety planning in place, by working with not only security, IT, different departments within her company, this woman's life was saved, and that of her unborn child. She continues to stay with that organization. When I fled my abusive husband 21 years ago, I had been a senior vice president of operations in the World Trade Tower in New York for one of the largest retail development companies in the United States. I had gone to Harvard and studied at Wellesley, and this was never supposed to happen to somebody like me, and it did. And I had to flee in the middle of the night with a suitcase and a pair of 4-inch heels. Don't ever try to change your life in a pair of 4-inch heels. You can't run fast enough. And I got on a train, and I changed my name, and I rebuilt my life. When I began this journey, I never thought that a company who hired me when I was Erica Edwards at that time, and I was hired as a secretary, the world's worst secretary, I might add. I was very rude on the phone. I did not know that they would be the ones who said, "We're not quite sure what to do, but we believe in you." So it's important that companies are there when employees are enduring violence, when they are seeing that their behavior of pounding their fist on a table is perhaps indicative of other behaviors that have to be addressed, but also when a person who's an employee is trying to recover and rebuild their lives. If it had not been for Hill Holliday, I don't know what would have happened to me. I stayed with that company for 14 years. They taught me how to be nice when I answered the phone, which was fabulous. But then they also believed in me and the contributions that I could make as well. And I became ultimately the Director of Human Resources and founded this sister organization in America as well. So when you talk about taking action, holistic programs about addressing all of the issues in kaleidoscope of what we endure, recognize the reality of people's lives. It deals with issues surrounding the people who endure, the perpetrators, and the people who witness, because we are all part of the same conversation. And we find that by providing the tools to companies, lives can be and will be changed. We have a strategy where we are about working not only with businesses, no matter the size, large, small, indifferent, public, private sector, but we are also about ensuring that we have the public, the third sector in conversation with us, because they are the experts and they are the leaders who save lives. Those are my details. It is an honor for me to be here with you today. each and every one of you have the possibility to change someone's life. And always remember that there is absolutely no shame in being alive and being part of a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Melissa, for that very moving account and to hear about the work you're doing, and also challenging again that message that sort of common sense and compassion cannot prevail. They can prevail, they should prevail, and here's another example of that. So thank you very, very much indeed. Sir Patrick, would you like to tell us more about this issue from your perspective? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I am happy and proud to be part of this wonderful event. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story, about my very personal reasons for becoming a patron of the national domestic violence charity Refuge. It has taken many years for me to be able to talk about my own experience, but I truly believe that it is only by speaking out about domestic violence that we can really begin to challenge the myths that surround it, as well as the shame and the fear that go with it. When I was a child, I witnessed violence against my mother. My father was a soldier, had been a soldier, a regimental sergeant major, no less. He was a man of enormous discipline and charisma, brilliant at his military job. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. At home, with his war service over, he became only available for semi-skilled work. And that produced an angry and unhappy and frustrated man who was not, particularly when alcohol was involved, able to control his emotions or his hands. I was 5 years old when this began, and I was witness to harm, physical harm, emotional harm, psychological harm, and social harm. As a child witnessing these events, I felt helpless, lonely, confused, and of course I couldn't help feeling responsible too. Our house was very small. When you live with violence in a confined space, you learn to gauge the temperature of situations very quickly. I became an expert at reading the temperature of conflict. I knew exactly when the shouting was done and when a hand was about to be raised. I knew exactly the moment to insert myself between my father's fist and my mother's face. And that's a skill no child should ever have to learn. One thing I now know is that domestic violence is protected by silence. The victims themselves, family members, neighbors, even carers. As a child, I recall hearing carers, police officers, doctors in my home say things like, "Well, she must have provoked him," or "Mrs. Stewart, it takes two to make an argument." They had no idea. As a child, I didn't have the words to explain or the confidence. As an adult, I can tell the truth. The truth is, my mother did nothing to deserve the violence she endured. She did not provoke my father. And even if she had, responding with violence is an unacceptable way of dealing with conflict. Let's be clear, domestic violence is a crime. Violence is a choice a man makes, and he alone is responsible for it. And its practice, its habit, can be passed on. In my own relationships as an adult, I have known the feelings that can begin to overwhelm good judgment and the internal battle that must take place to control those urges and impulses. Luckily, I chose acting as a career, And for an actor, no feeling or experience is ever wasted, but it can be channeled into creativity. But we can all choose to stop it. Domestic violence is not inevitable. It can be prevented. We all have a choice to refuse to use violence against others, and a choice to support those who suffer violence. And, where appropriate, those who give in to it. The violent man needs help too. There was none for my father. And understand, I never ceased to admire him and want his approval, or my mother to love him. When Refuge asked me to become a patron in 2007, I accepted without hesitation. And as has been said, I accepted for my mother because as a child I could do little to support her. But through my work with Refuge, I can give some support and some encouragement to women who live in fear, just as my mother and I did. I can challenge those destructive myths which still shroud this issue. I can help tell the truth about domestic violence. One myth is that domestic violence only exists in back streets and council estates. Wrong. It exists at every level of society, in all professions. The £1 million penthouse and the £10 million estate, as well as the back street terrace house. People simply don't believe it. There are people still alive today who have refused to accept that violence was one part of my father's life. They knew him socially, and they knew him through his work and through his support of my school. And they simply could not accept that there was another feature to him. Refuge's story began 40 years ago when it opened the world's very first safe house for abused children and women in Chiswick. It's now the country's largest provider of specialist domestic violence services. On any given day, Refuge's national network of services supports over 1,600 women and children, and the National Domestic Violence Helpline answers 400 calls a day from women living in the grip of domestic violence. And sadly, the demand for these services is overwhelming. 2 women are killed every week in England and Wales by a current or former partner. Children are affected. I was shocked to learn recently that 1 in 7 children in London will experience domestic violence in their childhoods. The lasting impact of violence on children and women can be severe. I know. Refuge provides a range of specialist services shaped to meet the needs of those women and children, from refuges and community schemes to independent advocates who support women who have the courage to go through the courts. Alongside these life-changing services, Refuge also runs powerful advertising campaigns to reach out to women and to challenge those who perpetrate or condone violence. Because, let's be clear about this, if we fail to raise our voices in protest against domestic violence, we become part of the problem. We all have a responsibility to speak out. Refuge's work is outstanding. But there is so much more that needs to be done, and the current financial climate is making things much harder. Recently, I've been working with Refuge to raise awareness of the devastating impacts of local authority cuts. Funding to the domestic violence sector has been slashed by over 31% between 2010 and 2011. On an average day last year, 230 women were turned away from refuges because there was not enough space for them. 230 women every day. The impact of these cuts will be nothing less than devastating. The death toll of domestic violence is already staggeringly high. If specialist services continue to close up and down the country, more women and more children will be trapped with violence, and they will be risking serious injury or very much worse. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Patrick, for that very moving exposition from your perspective. And the whole idea of this protection of silence and the need, the really powerful need to sort of breach that silence is so clear from everything that's been said today. We did start a little bit late, so we're sort of going to have to be running very close to the time here. So I just was going to ask Deborah Jamieson if she would like to close our session with any comment on whether or not the question that we were discussing earlier about the role of men more broadly in the campaign is something that you'd like us to talk about, because obviously there is a massive role that they are playing, and just it's less well known, I guess, and I just thought it would be interesting to hear from.
Well, I think that the panel both from a personal perspective of how it impacts children and women, and also if each of us think in this room that 1 in 4 women in their lifetime in the UK will be affected by domestic violence, chances are it will be somebody you know and care about. It can be your sister, it could be your mother, it could be your co-worker, it could be your best friend. Orange and T-Mobile have supported us in a campaign through their Do Something Good called For the Women in My Life campaign. And you can download a free application, upload a photo of a woman that means a lot to you, text why she's significant, and help us think of ways that we can address domestic violence together, because it will take all of us working together. And we know how important services like Refuge are. So please think about what you can do individually and what we can do collectively. Thank you.
There's some very clear messages coming out, and the least we can do is to write to our MP as requested by the Baroness. And so I think I'd just like to take this last moment to thank everyone very, very much for speaking. Baroness Scotland, Melissa Morbeck, Sir Patrick Stewart, and Deborah Jamieson, and for you all for coming. And I'm sure I don't need to say it. Take the message from this very grueling but very informative and very challenging session, and take action where you can. And because it requires the common sense, it's so clear. I mean, it's just so clear to hear from everybody that it is that common sense root cause that can be addressed, and when it is addressed, everyone wins out of it. And if you're going to count social change in pennies, then that argument can be made in one too. So thank you very, very much for a really, really important and inspiring session. Thank you.